Hey everyone, I'm Coach Chippys and I've been a professional top laner or head coach for the past 8 years. During this time I've reached Worlds and MSI multiple times. Now I'm a full-time coach with a ton of passion towards helping players unlock their potential and climb to their dream rank. How's it going guys? Today I'm going to be teaching you exactly how to learn and master Garen. Now a lot of people see this champion as one that should only be played in lower elo, however I disagree. The champion is extremely powerful regardless of your rank, however if you are master tier or above I do recommend strictly using Garen as a counter pick, because if you don't you're most likely going to get punished in lane a lot of the time. However for the most part you should be fine, because especially this patch when they nerf basically every other rune in the game except for Phase Rush, which is Garen's main rune, he feels extremely strong right now, so I recommend you giving him a try, and this guide is going to help you do exactly that. First up, we're going to be covering the runes, and Garen has two main pages, however you will be taking one the majority of the time, and that is the Phase Rush page. Now this rune page is extremely powerful on Garen, as it really helps make up for a lot of his weaknesses in terms of mobility, because it's very easy to stick onto your opponent when you have Phase Rush and get the full duration of your E down, and even when you're running away, if you get ganked, you can pop it on their jungler and just boost on out of there, and it's really going to help increase your chance of survival, so I recommend taking this page most of the time, and I will be teaching you how to optimize it. Now, although this page has a bit of variety in terms of secondary runes, the primary runes are quite simple, where you're going to be running Nimbus Cloak and Celerity every game, as you really want to be maximizing your movement speed on Garen, and then for your third rune, you're either going to be taking Gathering Storm or Water Walking. Now, you will be taking Gathering Storm most of the time, as the rune will always give you value, however, Water Walking can be very good in games where your mid matchup is extremely volatile. So say for example you have Yone vs Yasuo mid, Sylas vs Talon, something along these lines, a lot of melee action, Fizz versus anything basically. Champs that have to snowball, champs that are going to be fighting early, water walking can be very valuable because it's going to allow you to gank mid between the lanes, mid to top, a lot quicker, and you're not going to lose as much farm top. And if you can be the difference maker in these volatile mid matchups, most of the time whoever gets the first kill you probably see in your games is going to snowball out of control. And if you take water walking, it can help you be the difference maker in that situation. Now, as for the secondary runes, I recommend running Resolve a lot of the time, especially if you're a beginner, you can take this rune page every time, but for the most part you will be running Resolve anyway, and you'll be running Demolish, the rune that has a ton of value no matter what. It's going to outweigh anything from the bottom tree, and then you're going to be running either Second Wind, Bone Plating, or Conditioning. Now, Second Wind, of course, you will take in matchups where you're afraid of their poke damage, champions like Kennen, GP, basically any ranged champ or champs with ranged spells. Second Wind is going to be very valuable, and then Bone Plating is going to be very good versus champions that don't have ranged spells. So champions like Riven, champions like Jax, champs like Darius, where they have to get onto in your face, basically, get melee range of you to pop it. Bone Plating will give you value, and then Conditioning you can take in free low matchups. So matchups such as Shen, champions like Malphite, where they don't really do a ton of damage, especially on this patch where they buffed Doran's shield. It can be very easy for you to sustain their damage, and then conditioning scaling is going to outweigh the other two. However, an alternative you can take for secondary runes, and this is for the more experienced Garens, is you can actually run Inspiration with Cosmic Insight and Free Boots. Now, Cosmic Insight, of course, one of the best runes in the game, and if you take it on Garen, you're going to have your Ghost and your Flash up more often. Now, Garen is very reliant on summoner spells to teamfight. Even though he scales extremely well, he's still Garen. He's still very immobile, but if you have your Ghost and your Flash up, it's going to fix that problem, and if you have Cosmic Insight, you're going to have them up more often. So this rune feels extremely good on Garen if you can get away with it, if you don't need Resolve for lane. I definitely recommend greeting and taking this page, and then free boots is just free money and also extra movement speed, so you take this as well. Moving on to Garen's second rune page, the Conqueror page. Now this rune page can be a little bit of a trap at times, so if you're ever unsure what to take, I recommend defaulting to Phase Rush. However, if you are versus a dive comp, Conqueror can be very good. And a dive comp is essentially when you're versus a bunch of champions that have to run into you. So if they have Hecarim jungle with a, let's say, Sylas mid, Yone mid, Yasuo, champions that have to run into your team to do anything. They're not going to be able to range you from far away, they have to come into you. So you don't really need the Phase Rush to stick onto them to chase them down because they're coming to you. So in that situation, Conqueror can feel extremely good, and on Conqueror you're going to be running Triumph every game, Tenacity and Last Stand. These will never change, as Tenacity is going to give you the most value. Triumph, of course, Garen doesn't have mana, you don't need Presence of Mind, and then Last Stand is the best out of the three, it will do the most damage in the majority of your games, and then for secondary range you will always run Sorcery with Nimbus Cloak and Celerity, because even though in some matchups you may feel you need Resolve, you can't really afford to not have any mobility on Garen, you need some of the movement speed perks from this tree. So I do recommend running Sorcery second if you take Conqueror, and only running Conqueror when you're versus a dive comp, or to simplify it, a bunch of melee champions. Up next, we're going to be covering summoner spells. Now, there are quite a few options you can take on Garen, however, I do recommend defaulting to Ghost and Flash the majority of the time. as these are the spells that not only scale the best, but they also help make up for Garen's lack of mobility. And there's a spell you should never take on Garen, and that is Teleport. This is a bait on Garen because you don't really need it. You have so much sustain in lane with your passive Endurance Shield, you don't really need to use it to TP back. Your TP flanks bot are quite weak early game, and then mid game, the more items you get, the more points in Q you get, your movement speed is only going to get higher and higher. It's very easy for you to run from lane to lane. The TP is just a bait on Garen, and I would never take it. But as for alternatives to Ghost and Flash, you can take Ignite in very certain situations. So especially if you have Conqueror, Ignite is good as well when you're versus a bunch of melee champs, or if you're just in a matchup in general. Let's say they have a Gwen, or they have a Sylas or a Fiora, champions with a lot of healing, and champions that have to fight you from close range. Ignite is extremely good. And then for Exhaust, the final option, I would only take this in matchups such as Kennen or such as Tryndamere, where versus Kennen, it's going to be easier for you to stick onto him and beat him down. You can neutralize his burst, and especially in team fights, you can help your team out by exhausting his ulti. And then versus Tryndamere, it's really easy to use exhaust to kite out his ult. And then you re-engage, of course, ult him when his ult runs out. But for the most part, you don't really want to just sit there and fight Tryndamere to the death. You want to use exhaust and kite him around to play around your cooldowns. And having exhaust and either flash or ghost together is going to be really helpful with that. Up next, we're going to be covering item builds, and we'll start off with the starting item, where most of the time you will be building Doran's Shield, as Garen is quite a weak laner, so you will need Doran's Shield in a lot of matchups to help you survive, and most of the time you will be wanting to stay in lane for 1100 gold. However, there are some matchups where I will go Doran's Blade, and that is in matchups where they have no ability to force trades onto you. So champions like Set, champions like Trundle, they literally can't hit you. If they run towards you, you can walk away. Worst case, you can Q away, but they're not really going to be able to damage you, and Doran's Blade does scale better than Doran's Shield, so if you can greed and get away with it, then of course it will be better, but for the most part, you will be defaulting to the Shield. Now, as for your first buy, it's extremely important that you stay in lane until you get 1100 gold. Now, that may be challenging in some matchups, especially in higher elo. However, I've found even in Challenger, you can get to that point if you're playing for it. If you're going to the lane with the clear plan, I don't really want to fight this guy too much. I just want to get my 1100 gold. And that doesn't mean you never trade, of course, but your primary objective is to get 1100 gold before you base. Because if you can do so, then you can buy Berserker Greaves, which is an extremely good first buy, and it'll allow you to get back to lane quicker. It'll allow you to proxy between the towers. It'll allow you to do a lot of things, space them out, get onto them, whatever you need to do. These boots are going to do the job for you. They feel extremely good if you can get them in one go. And then if you've got the inspiration tree, if you've got free boots and you're playing more for scaling, then you can just go Iron Spike Whip first and try to get your Stride Breaker as fast as possible. And then if you're somehow unable to get to 1100 gold, if you're versing a good laner or you make a mistake or get ganked, then trying to get Pickaxe at least will be your next best bet. And as for your first item, you will be building Stridebreaker every single game no matter what. You may have seen some people in your games run Triforce, but this is the biggest bait I've ever seen. This item just feels completely horrible on Garen, and I've never played a champion from game to game, switched out one item and felt such a massive difference in power as I did when I tried out Triforce. Stridebreaker is just better, there's no reason for Triforce, and for Stridebreaker the build path is better. Of course you can go Iron Spike Whip, Pickaxe, and with Iron Spike Whip you can actually proc Phase Rush very easily. With just QE Iron Spike, Triforce you're never going to be able to do that. The wave clear from Stridebreaker, better of course, staying on your opponent with the slow, getting away from them with slow. There are just so many reasons to build Stridebreaker, and the only reason you build Triforce, I guess, would be the initial Q damage, because while you're spinning you're not proccing the Sheen. So it's completely worthless in my opinion. And I would never build Triforce, and I recommend you never build it as well. Now, as for the second item, this is where it gets a bit more exciting, as you're going to be picking up an early Zeal. This item is extremely gold efficient, it's only 1100 gold, and it gives a lot of stats that Garen wants. Attack speed, move speed, and crit chance. Of course, you mainly want it for the attack speed and move speed, but Garen's E can crit, that's not bad. But for the most part, this item just feels extremely good to pick up early, because it's so cheap. And even though you're delaying your second item, it's really good to get when you're ahead. And in some games, you can actually build two of them. So let's say, for example, you win your lane, you've watched this guide now, you're the king of laning, you base with 2200 or 1900 and a dagger, you can pick up two Zeals, come back onto the map extremely powerful. Or if you base when you already have one Zeal and you have around 1100, 1200 gold, second Zeal can be good in that situation. However, for the most part, you will be sticking on one Zeal because you don't really want to be delaying your second item for too long. But the reason it's fine to delay it for one Zeal, it's because if you're ahead, especially versus your lane opponent, even though you're delaying your second item, he's delaying his as well because he's behind you, right? He's not going to get it faster than you, or even if you're only up 300 gold or whatever, he may get it, but you're still going to be strong with the Zeal, and it's going to allow you to get pushed in some matches where you wouldn't be able to in the side lane. You're going to be able to eat camps easier, run between the lanes. It's just going to feel extremely good, so I recommend picking one or two of these up. And then once you've got the zeal done, your second item is mainly going to be either Hullbreaker, Sterex, or Dead Man's Plate. Now, Hullbreaker will be in games where you want to be split pushing, so there are two scenarios with it. I don't want you to tunnel on it every game. The main two scenarios where you build Hullbreaker is when you're in a matchup that is going to allow you to break the tower where you otherwise wouldn't be able to. So most AP champions, Kennen, Vladimir, Rumble, they struggle with breaking the cannon creep, the super creep, when you've got Hullbreaker, and then tanks in general, or on Cho'Gath, they all struggle, well not Cho'Gath actually, he can eat it down, but basically any other tank, they struggle with handling the super creep, so that's going to allow you to break tower in front of them. And then in games where your whole team is playing poorly is the second scenario, where you know you're probably not going to be able to win a team fight, your whole team is behind, so you just want to go Hullbreaker and try to split push your way to victory. And then for Dead Man's Plate, you'll build this in games where you want to be team fighting and you're versing a bunch of ranged champions. So Dead Man's feels extremely good having that movement speed getting between the lanes, and in games where they don't have a ton of melees, where they have ranged champs, you're really going to need all the movement speed you can get onto them and stay onto them. And then as for Sterex, you'll be building this in games where they have not too many ranged champs, a decent mix, a balanced team comp, and you want to be team fighting. Sterex is the safest choice, it's never going to let you down, and then in games where you don't want to split push as well. And then as for Black Cleaver, I would build this in games where you need the armor pin directly. However, this can be a bit of a bait, as Garen's E gives you armor shred already, but if you're versus a tank top, tank jungle, of course Black Cleaver is going to be very good. And then in More, I'd almost never buy it. The only reason I have it here is if you're versing a triple AP topside comp. And as for your boots, it will be Berserker Greaves almost every time, but you will go Merc Treads in games where they just have a ridiculous amount of AP and CC. So let's say they have a Mumu, Sejuani, Leona, just too much crowd control, you will be building Merc Treads, and then Plated Seal Caps in the same situation, but for AD champions, when you verse a full AD comp. Moving on to your third item. Now, most of the time, Dead Man's Plate is going to be feeling pretty good. It's going to allow you to do what you want to be doing on Garen. You want to be pushing up the side and then rotating from side to an objective or to a team fight. And the extra movement speed from Dead Man's is going to help you just do just that. Now, the times you don't build it is if you've already built it, second item, of course, you can go Sterex, or you can go Black Cleaver in games where you need armor pin straight away, but you also need a bit of tankiness as well. So you don't really want to go full Mortal Reminder in a game where they only have one tank, but if you're versus a tank in the side lane, then Black Cleaver can feel quite good. But in games where you do verse multiple tanks, Mortal Reminder will be your best armor pin item. Because this item, even though it's mainly for AD carries, Garen uses the crit chance quite well, and the build path feels a lot nicer than the other items. Now, as for the alternatives, you can also upgrade your Zeal into a rapid fire cannon. Now, I see a lot of people do Phantom Dancer, but I think rapid fire cannon is much better. It actually gives you extra range on your Q, although it's not much, and extra damage. It feels a lot better to me than PD, so I recommend rapid fire as a Zeal upgrade. But of course, if you have two Zeals, maybe you can get both. But by then, you probably are going to be selling your second Zeal anyway. So most of the time, your Zeal upgrade will be rapid fire, and then alternatives, you can go Force of Nature in games where you need magic resist. Now, this is Garen's best magic resist item because it also gives them movement speed, so that feels quite good. And then Randuin's in games where they have two crit champions, so a Yasuo mid and a normal ADC, Randuin's is going to feel quite nice. And as for your final two items, if you don't have any MR by now, I strongly recommend picking up a Force of Nature. Unless they're a full AD comp, then in that case you can go Death's Dance. But if not, you'll be going Force of Nature, of course, and then you can still go Death's Dance if they only have one AP threat, and you already have MR from that point, and then you'll be building Mortal Reminder in games where you need Armor Pin, because building Black Cleaver as a 4th and 5th item does not feel good, because by now you already have a bunch of HP and resistances, so Mortal Reminder is the superior Armor Pin item. And then Rapid Fire Cannon, of course, is just an upgrade to your Zeal. In some games you will sell out your Zeal and buy another one of these items, but most of the time it'll be fine just to upgrade it to IRC. And down below I have some full 6 item examples that you can gain some inspiration from, and if you're really struggling to know when to build which item, then just copying these is going to be fine as a... Up next we're going to be covering the laning phase, and I'm going to speed up this part because there's actually not a lot that goes into early laning on Garen. The most important thing you need to know is having your clear game plan in mind. I want to get to 1100 gold before I base, and then you want to be building either Berserker Greaves or Iron Spike Whip. Most of the time it will be Berserker Greaves, and once you get that spike, you can actually start to win a lot of your matchups. Because around that time in the game, 5 minutes, 5:30, you'll be level 6, you have Berserker Greaves, 3 points in your E, you can really start to lay down some damage. But if you try to play too aggressive early game, get punished, and you have to base, you lose CS XP, maybe even die to a gank, you're not going to be able to get that spike, and you're going to be weak for a lot longer time. Because if you have to base and buy Ruby Crystal or a Longsword, you're just not going to have the same amount of power that you would if you stayed in lane to 1100. So that is my game plan in this game versus this set. I want to farm out 1100 gold, and I recommend going Doran's Shield most of the time, to be honest. I went Doran's Blade because I'm greedy, I want to min-max it, and of course it scales a lot better, like we just talked about. But for most matchups, you will be going shield, but versus Set, because he can't really trade onto me, his champion has such short range, I felt like I was confident that I could greed Doran's Blade. So it is matchup specific, objectively, but if you're feeling confident that you can greed Doran's Blade and get away with it, let's say you're versus 10, I don't know, Dr. Mundos, and you feel like they're not punishing you. And in that situation, you can go Doran's Blade against the next Mundo and see how it feels. So versus this guy, I'm starting to play a bit more aggressive at level 4, and I'm just looking to bounce the wave back and forth. I'm playing ping pong with the waves essentially, where you let them push the first stack, and then you start to build waves 4 and 5 together, and then you bounce a big wave back to them so that you can get the wave crashed in. And then I'm fogging, trying to find their jungler so I don't get ganked, wait for my ward, and I come back. Now, unfortunately, he was able to hold this freeze. I wasn't able to fully crash it because I was scared of their jungler. That's just reality, unfortunately. If it was 1v1, I would have staunched him and let my wave come in. But because he's got a jungler looking to gank me, I had to go sort that out first. And now I'm just letting the wave come back to me again. I'm just playing ping pong with the waves, waiting to get 1100 gold. Where most champions, you would actually base after crashing that initial wave, but on Garen you don't want to do that, because you want to get to 1100 gold. Now you may be thinking, if Garen is such a weak early game champion, how can I get to my 1100 gold without basing? And the answer is your passive. Garen's passive is just so broken, it gives you such an insane amount of health regeneration, and if you combo that with Doran's Shield and even Second Wind as well if you need it, there's no real champion in the game that can force you to base. I've actually versed a couple Challenger Veins while making this guide, and both times I was able to get 1100 before recalling. Of course they could have played it better, maybe if I versed a Korean Challenger Vein they could have made me base, but for the most part you'll find, if you come into the game with a clear game plan in mind, that's what you want to do. You want to get your 1100 gold, you should be able to get it 99% of the time. Now, of course, there'll be harder situations. There'll be some matches where it's harder than others, but if you have that clear game plan, you should be able to do it. And here, up against the Set, that is my plan, and now that he's based, that is my opportunity to base as well. So I want to be one-shotting this wave as fast as I can, matching its base, and then coming onto the map with my 1100 gold, and that's when I'm going to look to play aggressive. Of course, you don't want to play passive the entire game, even though you're a good scaling champion. You just need to know your timers. And the most common timer is after you've spent your 1100. So here, I'm coming onto the map. Well, I'll skip forward a bit. Coming onto the map with my Berserker Greaves board. And ideally, you would base at exactly 1100. 1500 is not too good, right? You've got a longsword and a Berserker Greave, which you might think that feels better, having an extra bit of AD, but that just means they have more money to spend as well. You really want to be matching 1100 to 1100 if you can. But it's fine, it's not the worst thing in the world. And now my game plan, it's going to be pretty hard for me to kill this Set. His champion is not extremely weak. Even if I freeze the lane, it's not like I can just beat him outright. So I want to be pushing and then moving. I want to be pushing and ganking mid, pushing and running into the jungle, and ideally I'll be proxying between the waves. Here I play for fruit, of course I took a bad trade, and now I'm looking to punish the jungler who invades our jungle, and I'm just looking to use my prio to attack the enemy team. Because in some matchups, you can play for the solo kill, of course, but versus Set, it's going to be very difficult, and now that I've got red buff off their jungler, it's very easy for me to punish him. But my main goal, coming back into the lane with my 1100 gold, was to push, crash the wave under tower, and then I would have 3 game plans in mind. I would either proxy, like I'm going to do here, most likely, proxy, clear the wave, walk into the enemy jungle, eat their camps, chase them out, or I'm going to flank mid, or I'm just going to run down river and pressure, right? There's 3 main gameplays you're going to be doing, and the most pressuring is what I'm doing now. Proxying between the wave, running into the jungle. Of course, here I need to base, but for the most part, you want to be proxying, and then running and trying to make a play or eating the enemy camps. Now for my next example, I wanted to showcase some aggressive options you have, because waiting for 1100 gold might sound boring, and in some matchups you might have to just do that, but there are a lot of situations where you can play aggressive at the right timer. So primarily you can look level 1, where auto Q auto phase rush away, you can take a trade there, especially if you have Doran's Shield, it can help you a lot in those sorts of trades, especially Doran's Shield versus Doran's Blade. If you take an even trade, it's going to be good, because Garen's passive and Doran's Shield, you're going to have a lot more regen than them, and here I'm just letting him push me in still, but I'm going to look to trade onto him with my Q. Right there, I didn't look to do it because he's level 2, no reason to take a level 1 versus 2 fight, but now the main time I want to show you is going to come after this, where most people you verse are going to probably look to crash wave 3, like this guy's doing, and you just want to be looking to farm, trade on him with your Q if you can. Obviously, in a lot of situations, you won't be able to, especially here when there's a ton of minions, but you really just want to be looking to attack them on the bounce back. So here actually runs at my jungler, where most people won't do that, right? This guy's a Halo player. Most people will stay in the lane, and then the timer you look to punish them is coming soon, where if they crash a big wave under your tower, you are going to get level 4 before them. And if you can punish that window, not every matchup you'll win 4v3 to be honest, but a lot of situations you can, and Trundle is no exception, where here I'm level 4 versus 3, and I look to all-in him straight away. I pop Ghost Phase Rush, chasing him down, running through him so that I'm constantly getting auto attacks, and I was able to solo kill this Ignite lethal tempo Trundle purely because I abused the fact that I know when someone crashes a big wave into me, I'm going to get level 4 before them. So now in this example, I wanted to showcase exactly how you should be playing against tank champions or free matchups in general, where you really want to be taking Demolish, and once you've had your 1100 gold base, you want to be playing for Demolish proc, Tower Plates, proxying between the waves, and playing for pressuring the map. So when you verse a champion like Malphite, champion like Ornn, Sion, it doesn't really matter if you kill them, because they are still going to do the same job. They're going to be a tanky frontline engage for their team, so it doesn't matter if you set them behind, you want to be using the pressure you're going to get, the power you're going to get, to impact the rest of the map, while also getting yourself ahead at the same time. So playing in this way, where you're getting yourself ahead from tower plates, proxying the waves between the tower, and then running into the enemy jungle, eating his camp, setting him behind, chasing him out, maybe even killing him in some situations, ganking mid if they play aggressive, you are pressuring top jungle and mid at the same time, while simultaneously getting yourself ahead from tower plates. Now that is all ideal, it'll be very hard to do that every single time, right? Even if you're versus a tank, if their jungler gets 3 kills bot, he can run up and kill you, so you really want to be playing around where the jungle is and how strong they are. Even if they're top, if they're a weak champion, let's say they're playing Hecarim level 4, level 5, they're not really going to do anything to you, are they? And here, normally you wouldn't be proxying that early in the game to be honest, but in this game I was actually able to, because this Malphite, either he was autofilled or, just inexperienced top laner in general. And here I'm just playing to break tower plates every time Demolish is up. So here I'm not pushing this wave straight away, because you want to be building waves. You want to be stacking 2 or 3 waves together and then pushing it in, so that if they try to block the wave, it's going to be very difficult for them. And if they walk up, you can punish them, of course. Where here I didn't spin onto them, I didn't want to ruin my wave. But in general, you just want to be building waves together and then using that built wave to proc your Demolish and then walk behind the tower and start to proxy. And here I clear the wave, and now he's trying to block my minions, right? He doesn't want to let me demolish, but I do damage to him. I can beat him down, and eventually he has to let me, and now he's feeling frustrated, he's ulting me, and he's calling his team for help. As Alistair is running up, I'm drawing people to me, so I'm helping bot lane as well, in theory, but most of the time, support's not going to roam top in your games. Most of the time, you will have to waste the jungler's time, make him come to you, phase rush, boost on out of there. Garen is just such a good champ to proxy on, because especially with phase rush, it's going to be very easy for you to survive ganks. Worst case, you have to flash or ghost, but it's going to be very easy for you to survive. And even though it might feel bad, oh, I got ganked and had to burn ghost, you're wasting the enemy jungler's time. You're still impacting the game in that way. And then eventually, when they're not pressuring you, when they give up on trying to kill the phase rush really fast Garen, you're going to be able to keep proccing Demolish, get this tower lower and lower, and eventually you are going to be able to break it. And the way to counterplay it is what this Malphite's doing, is blocking the wave from reaching tower. And it may be hard in some situations, but as long as you're building waves and trying to and damaging them when they're blocking the wave, eventually you will be able to get the tower down. So I'll skip ahead here, where a skirmish actually breaks out, where Kalphas went for Scuttle Crab. We're able to win this one, and then from this, I was able to get the top tower. And even if I wasn't able to break it versus Malphite, right? Let's say he was playing really well, he was blocking all the waves, he was not letting me break the final play. Eventually, he will have to base. He'll have to recall, or mid-game will start, people will swap around, and I don't even have to be in this lane anyway. Eventually, you will be able to get it, but the main point I'm trying to get at is your game plan versus these free matchups should be take Demolish, proxy between the waves, proc Demolish when you can, and then look to pressure the enemy jungler or mid. And for my final example, I wanted to showcase what I was touching on earlier about how you can use your prio to impact mid lane as well. Where in this game, versus Renekton, I've of course got my 1100 gold buy, Iron Spike whip this game, and I'm going to be looking to push and pressure the map. I don't really want to be playing to kill this Renekton. Of course he's not an Ornn or a Malphite, killing him does do something, but I can't actually kill him to be honest. Renekton at level 6, very powerful champ, but here I'm able to get prio as I was the one who based first, and now I'm going to be looking to pressure mid. Garen is just such a fast champion, high movement speed with Q, that it's pretty easy to get back from mid to top after a gank, and here the enemy mid jungle is playing aggressive mid, so I see this as my opportunity. Where here, even after I pushed my wave top, and I was walking down river, I would have been looking mid and seeing, okay, if the enemy mid, let's say he's playing Ori, sitting under tower playing safe, of course I would not have ganked him in that situation. You gank mid if they're playing aggressive. You make the mid laner unable to play the game. If they're playing Fizz or Silas, Yone especially, and they're trying to play aggressive and playing for solo kills, it can be very easy for you to use your prio to screw that matchup. Up next we have abilities, tips and tricks, and comboing, and we'll start with Garen's Q, which is the spell you should be learning level 1, and also the spell you should be maxing second, and you can be using the spell to get around the map mid-game, and even getting back to lane, you should be abusing the high amount of movement speed you gain from the spell to get from place to place. Don't just walk like any other normal champ, abuse the movement speed of the spell. Garen's Q is also an auto attack reset, so you should be abusing this mechanic to get an extra auto attack in for free and maximize your damage. Another tip around Garen's Q, and I'm pretty sure not many people do this, I haven't seen them use it much, but Garen's Q can actually be used to cleanse slows. So let's say you're withered by Nasus, slowed down by Janna, you can just use your Q to cleanse that slow instantly, and then you're going to be getting your maximum amount of movement speed, where if you use your Q before they slowed you, then you're going to be slowed regardless. And a cool little trick you can do with Garen's Q, granted it won't come up that often in game, is that if someone is standing very close to a thin wall, you can actually Q them over the wall. Moving on to Garen's W. Now this spell not only grants you a shield, but it also briefly grants you an insane amount of tenacity. You want to be trying to use this ability just before you get stunned to reduce the amount of duration that you're CC'd for. And a cool trick you can do with Garen's W is the way his passive works, the health regen, is if you get hit by an enemy champion, then of course it's not going to be healing you anymore. But if you're just going to be hit by a little bit of damage, so let's say for example a Gnar Q or a Gnar auto attack, and you block that damage with your W shield, it's not actually going to break your passive. He's not actually doing damage to you, he's just breaking your shield, so your passive is going to keep ticking, which is extremely useful in range matchups. Moving on to Garen's E, it's a pretty straightforward ability, you just spin around and chop everyone up that's near you, you'll be maxing the spell first, and once you have 3 points in E, you should be able to one-shot the casters, so it has very good wave clear, and some tricks with this spell is you can actually cancel your auto attack with it, so if you auto attack and then E, it's going to cancel the auto animation but still get the damage off as long as you've practiced it, and you can do the same thing with your Q. You can QE, which is very common on Garen, one of its most popular combos I'd say, so you want to be looking to cancel your Q animation with the E. Another thing about Garen's E is it actually spins faster the more attack speed you have, which is a huge reason why you build Berserker Greaves early and you build into early Zeals, because you want your champion to be spinning faster, doing damage more quickly, and breaking their armor as soon as possible. And as for Garen's ultimate, the pretty straightforward ability is a point and click execute, which means the low HP your target is, the more damage it's going to do. So you only want to be using this on low HP targets, primarily to finish off a kill, and my tip for this is you can actually buffer this spell, as it takes time for the ulti to come down from the sky, the big sword, but if they flash away from it but you've already started it, it's still going to follow them. Or even if they CC you, knock you back, it doesn't matter. If you start the ulti channel time, it's still going to go off regardless. The only way they can cancel it is by going invisible. The champs like Vayne can be very annoying, and in lane, against any champ, if they walk into the bush as you're starting your R, they can actually cancel it. So make sure you ward your bush, of course, when you're going for an all-in, but for the most part, you should be fine as long as you know how to buffer this spell. And my other tip for the ultimate that you need to watch out for is your ulti actually cancels your E. So let's say you're spinning through the whole team, spinning through 3 people, and you ulti straight away, your E is actually going to be put on cooldown, which most of the time it won't be a problem, but it's really good to look out for, especially when you're Eing through multiple people. And a tip with Dead Man's Plate, as you know, if you auto attack or Q, you're going to lose your stacks, you're going to lose your extra movement speed, but if you just spin, if you just use your E, you're not actually going to lose your passive. So this is very important for side laning, where you use your E to clear the wave, and even your stride break if you have to, and you can keep your movement speed, so you can keep running between the lanes, keeping as much movement speed as possible and not losing any additional time. Moving on to Garen's combos, and the most important ones you need to know are the combos where you can pop your phase rush. So before you have Iron Spike Whip, you need to be using an auto attack, because your E, even though it's constantly doing damage, it only gives you one proc of Phase Rush. So you need to be using auto QE to pop Phase Rush, and then once you have Iron Spike Whip or Stride Breaker, that is going to be another stack of phase. So you can pop it by just going QE Stride, that is the most common one, but I see a lot of people make the mistake, especially early on before they have Iron Spike, where they just QE and they're not able to pop Phase Rush, and it's very hard for them to get away. And if you need to prop your Phase Rush level 1, you need to use Auto Q Auto as fast as you can. And if you ever need to, you can use your ulti as a stack of Phase Rush. Let's say later on into the game when your Stride Breaker is on cooldown, the way you can proc your Phase Rush is by QE ulting and running away if you need to. And as for the final combo, Garen's all-in combo, this one is extremely important that you practice the timing, because what you want to be doing is you want to start with Q, and you want to be Q flash E Stride Breaker into ulti, and you want to be timing your ulti that you're getting it down just as the silence from your Q runs out. Now this is very important, and you got to practice the timing a lot, because the more points in Q you have, the longer your silence will be. So basically, more points in Q you have, the longer you can spin through them, but it's really important that you get your ulti in the last possible tick of the silence, because from that point, they are either going to flash away, UCC on you, scoop you away with a Zaya, they're going to be trying to get away from you, but if you channel your ulti before they can do that, the ulti is still going to go through regardless. I'm next going to be going through matchups, and before we begin, I just want to make it very clear, this is a in general tier list for all elo brackets. This is not specifically for Halo, because if it was, a lot of these champions would be higher up on the list. Especially in the skill matchup tier, a lot of these matchups are quite difficult in Challenger, but in other elo brackets they're fine. For example, while I was making this Garen guide, I started on an account which was around Diamond 1 to Master MMR, and those matchups in the skill matchup tier and below, and even the matchups that are opponent-sided, were very easy for me. I was able to outplay them with essentially knowing my limits on Garen, knowing my back timers, things like this. I was able to win these matchups. But once I started, the account MMR started climbing, and I versed 1000 LP Challenger players. Of course, these matchups were very difficult even in the skill matchup tier. So most of the time, if you're below Master or even Diamond, a lot of these matchups are going to be skillies, but the hard ones especially are going to be hard, but I'll go through them now. Starting off with the hard matchups. Now, if your lane opponent in these matchups are playing extremely well or almost perfect, there's not going to be much you can do. You need to be willing to go down XP and gold, and the lane is going to be tough, but you will outscale most of them, except for KO and Vayne, but even against KO there's some counterplay. However, versus Vayne, this is Garen's hardest matchup by far, and I recommend banning it, because even though I played against it multiple times, and every time I versed it I actually solo killed it early, they still just outscaled me so hard that eventually it got to the point where there's nothing I can do. And eventually, especially early game when they rush Static Shiv, their wave clear becomes so insane they can keep you stuck under the tower, poking you down, and there's not really any room for you to outplay them. However, the way you want to look to beat these range champions is you want to do a 2-trade process. So the first trade, you want to utilize the bushes to run at them and try to get onto them with your Q, with your E, and just take a short trade and Stride Breaker and Phase Rush away. Now, once they have 3/4 HP, you want to be looking to use either your Ghost or your Flash to all-in them with ulti. And even if you flash onto them, full combo them, and they don't die, even if they live 1 HP, it's still extremely good. They're going to have to base, they're going to give you a lot of breathing room in the lane, because most of these champions, except for Kennen and Kale, a lot of them will not take TP, so if they base, you have a lot of time to push a big wave under tower, maybe even proxy the next wave, and you're just creating a lot of breathing room by yourself by forcing a huge trade and getting them low HP. Now, that may not always be the case if they're playing extremely well, but I found for the most part, if you utilize the bushes and utilize your flash well, you will have opportunities against these players if they make mistakes. Now, as for the matchups on the opponent-sided tier, these matchups are going to be very difficult if they play to pull the wave back towards them. So say, for example, versus Darius or Olaf, if they crash 3, let the wave come back to them, it's going to be very hard. You really need to utilize the timer in which you're level 4, and of course versus Darius and Olaf you don't want to all in them with that, they could probably still win if they're full HP, but you want to use that to trade onto them. Get them low, get yourself low, because they're going to hit you back, and then regen back with your Doran shield and your passive, and then when they're trying to freeze, it's going to be a lot easier for you to crash their freeze. Now, if their jungler's involved, of course, it's going to be difficult, but in terms of pure 1v1, the matchup, if you're able to get them low before they freeze, it's going to be very good for you, and the best timer to do that is the timer when you're level 4 and they're level 3 that I showcased in the laning side of the guide. And then other than those champions, if you verse a champion like Na or Akshan, it's going to be pretty hard. If you can get 1100 gold first base, get tier 2 boots. Once you have Stride Breaker, those matchups are very easy, however. It's very easy for you to run them down in the side lane with Ghost, with Stride Breaker, a couple Zeals, and even Deadmans later on. You can really start to solo kill and outscale them, but the early lane may be hard. Just run Doran Shield second win and utilize your passive well. Moving on to skill matchups. Now, there will be some variables around where these champions should be depending on your bracket. For example, while making this guide, I versed some Master Tier Aatroxes and Fioras, and the matchup was extremely easy. But when I versed Challenger or even Pro players playing these champions, of course the matchup is in their favor. So it really depends where you are, but for the most part, if you're in an elo bracket diamond or below, if you truly understand Garen, and you're versus someone that doesn't have an extremely high level of mastery on their champion, you should be able to win it. And this guide's going to help you understand the champion well, so I'm confident you'll be able to be fine at the very least. But most of these matchups, you do outscale them. Garen scales extremely well, so you should be able to beat them in the side lane, even though in some of them, you will have to kite them out. For example, versus Tryndamere, you're not just going to sit there and beat him down. He's going to beat you down. But if you utilize your Stride Breaker by slowing him, utilize your Phase Rush, and even if you take Exhaust in that matchup, you can kite him out his ulti, re-engage with your ult, and you're going to be fine. So there is some skill to it. Of course, it's a skill matchup tier, but for the most part, I would say if you're extremely good at Garen, you should be fine in these matchups. Now, as for the Garen favored matchups, it's very important that you don't go into these matchups thinking, alright, I win this matchup, I'll just fight them level 1. That's just not the case. Garen is extremely weak level 1, and it isn't until around level 5, especially with your 1100 gold buy, that you can start to win these matchups even though they're in your favor. Even though it's in your favor, it doesn't mean you win the entire time, it means you win most of the time. So for example, versus Garen, if you fight him levels 1 to 3, he is going to beat you down. And if you get low, he'll let the wave come back into him, and he can really look to solo kill you. But if you play around your level 5, level 7 with Iron Spike Whip, or even Berserker Greaves, then you actually have a good time to beat him in the lane, because he can't block your E with his E, of course. So you're actually able to win trades against them later on, you just can't win them early. So it's important for all of these matchups that you basically write down how the matchup went, you learn from it, because even though it's in your favor, you're not going to beat them the entire time, so it's on you to identify which times you beat them, and then act upon it in future games. And as for the free matchup, same concept again, you don't necessarily hard win level 1. Some of them you actually do, versus Malphite or Shyvana, you can actually win level 1, and Singe especially, but for the most part you want to be running Demolish in these matchups and playing for Tower Plates, because even if you kill Malphite or Singe a couple times, it doesn't really matter. Of course it's nice if you get a free kill, take it, but I'm saying primarily your game plan should be, after your 1100 gold base, you should be coming out onto the map and trying to proxy between the waves, break Tower Plates, and impact the map that way, instead of just trying to shut down your lane 1v1. I'm next going to be covering the mid game, and there are two main concepts I want to teach you in regards to playing the mid game on Garen. The first one being, your main job in mid game is to create a numbers advantage for your team, because you're so powerful in the side lane, and you're so hard to kill, especially if you have summon spells, Stride Breaker, Phase Rush. It's very, very easy for you to get away from any type of gank. Now, the reason you want to go on the opposite side of the next objective is because when you pull people to you, you want to be allowing your team to take the objective for free. So in the worst case scenario, even if you die from getting 2v1 or 3v1, your team is still going to get something in return. Where if I were to push top, for example, even if they send their whole team to stop me, even if they send 5 people and they kill me, they can still take the objective right after. But if they do that bot, of course they're going to lose something. But of course you don't want to die, ideally. You just want to be creating a numbers advantage. So the best way to do that is to push waves under the bot tier 2, make someone react to you, keep them stuck there, keep them choking, clear the wave as high up as you can every time, and then you fog into the jungle. You eat camps, you threaten them under the tower if they leave, like this Talon in this example, he leaves the tower. Which of course he can't do. I know here I can one-shot him, and I was pretty confident I could survive this gank. Of course I didn't, but looking back on it, if I dodged that Nilly spear, I would live. So it's just my bad, right? I could have played it out better, but it doesn't really matter too much, because even though it's a 1-for-1, I'm creating a numbers advantage for my team. As you see now, they've killed Fiora, because they know, they see Nilly bot, they see Talon bot, they know they can play a 4v3, they can play super aggressive, and no one is really going to counter them. And the second most important concept I want to teach you in regards to playing mid-game on Garen is the pin and fog, where in this scenario I'm deploying bot because Baron is the next objective spawning, which means I want to be creating a numbers advantage for Baron, of course very important objective, and at this point I actually beat Fiora. So now I'm looking to push the waves under tower, and I'm going to look to keep him trapped under the tier 2 and fog between the lanes. Where here I'm fogging towards mid, I'm making the enemy team think I'm going to be ganking them, and if they play aggressive, if they're looking to fight mid, of course I'll commit, but they're not. In this scenario, no one's even showing mid, so I come back bot as fast as I can, and here I'm a couple seconds too late, which in this scenario doesn't matter, but if you ever drop your wave completely and let it walk past the tier 1, for example, and you verse a champ like Ornn, Malphite, Camille, where they have very good ganks, they can use that timer to punish your team. So it's pretty important that you don't let it drop if you can avoid it, unless you're making a play. And here I see them playing aggressive mid, so I commit a little bit more than I normally would, but they respect my timer again. So I just head back bot, and I'm repeating the same thing over and over again until someone makes a mistake. Eventually, either Fiora will make a mistake, she'll run to a fight, and then I'll be able to break the tower, or the enemy team will make a mistake. They'll play too aggressive and I'll be able to punish them. So yeah, clear the wave again and fog again. Pin and fog, just do it on repeat until you see an opening. And you could eat camps while you're doing this as well if you wanted to, but here I noticed the Israel was playing a bit too far up, and I'm clearing their vision, I'm threatening them. This Israel was thinking about me the whole time, he's scared to push mid even though they're stronger than my bot lane, they could have got mid push if they wanted, and here I'm just using my pressure to alleviate pressure from the rest of my team, which means they can play more towards Baron, they can control the top river, and if they ever get caught, if there's ever a fight, I'm going to be there. Where here, Kai'Sa gets killed, and here I'm just pin and fogging again, where if they start the Baron, of course I'm going to fully commit, and if they don't, I'm just going to repeat the pin and fog over and over again. Up next, we're going to be covering teamfighting, and I've broken down teamfighting on Garen into 3 main categories. The first one being your position. Your position should be you're going to be flanking from either the side or the back. You want to be attacking them from a different angle, because Garen is terrible at front to back settings, you can't run through their team, you can't just hit the front line, you don't do that much damage, but you're extremely threatening from the flank. In this position, I'm actually able to flank unseen, I'm on a pink, which is a bonus. It's not necessary, but if you can, it's going to be good. And here I go too late. Of course, I hesitated because I have 5 people, but in the end, I do my job. I flank them unseen, which is better, and I'm able to kill one and get out, because Garen is extremely slippery. You've got Stride Breaker, you've got your Phase Rush, Ghost and Flash. It's very easy for you to assassinate one guy and get away, as long as you're attacking them from a different angle. If you're running straight through all 5 of their teammates, you're probably not going to be able to do so. But if you're attacking from behind, you get straight onto their carry. Even if you have to flash, you can one-shot them and Phase Rush out. It's going to be very hard for them to lock you down. And the second concept you need to know to teamfight on Garen is holding your spells. And I actually showcased this in a recent video I made where Adam played Garen at Worlds, and he showed this extremely well. But I have another example here, where my ex-teammate Violet sent me this clip of him playing Garen, and he holds his spells quite well. Where here, if you can see, it could be very tempting for him to run in onto this Draven, onto this Ivan, and try to get a kill. But the rest of his team, if you notice, they are waiting for the Jace to come out of GA. They can't run past him and ignore him. They're going to get chunked as soon as he comes out of GA. They have to finish what they're doing. They have to wait for him to stand up, kill him again, before they can commit. So Violet, knowing that if he goes in now, no one is going to follow him up, he waits. He holds his spells till the right time. And as you can see, as soon as his team is finished killing this Jace out of GA, he commits. And his team is actually able to follow him up. As you can see, the RE can dash in as well. And the fight's going to go a lot better because he held his spells until the right time, until the time his team could actually follow up his engage. And the third and final concept is spacing, where Violet actually showed it very well in the second clip, but I'm going to show it again, where in this example Cassante is flanking, where normally on Garen of course you want to be flanking, but you don't really want to have two flankers. It can work sometimes of course, but for the most part if you do double flankers, it's very easy for the enemy team to engage on your team, because they're just a stack of 3, it's really easy for them to get turned on, so more often than not it's best to keep with one flanker. So here my Cassante is flanking, so I want to be spacing them. I want to be close enough to them that they're interested in the fight, they're trying to do damage to me, but not far enough away that they leave. They leave the dragon fight, they turn on Cassante. I want to be close enough to follow him up when he's here, but not too close that they can engage on us before he's here. So here I'm doing just that, spacing back and forwards, trying to dodge their skill shots, but keeping them interested, right? They see me walking towards them, they start walking towards me, I step back, they step back, we're playing this dance. And now that Cassante is close enough, I pop Ghost, I run in, and now I'm able to engage because Cassante can follow me up, and we're actually able to wipe this fight. Where if I went in too early or too late, of course it could have been really bad. And in this example, even if I went late, it probably would have been fine, but it's just an interesting concept to keep, because if you can space it to the point where you keep the enemy team interested, damn, that was bad of me. If you keep them interested, then it's going to be very easy for whoever's flanking on your team to join, and in the scenario where Violet showcased, where he was flanking, he was spacing enough that he can't get engaged on, but the enemy team can't engage on his team either. Up next, we're going to be covering Garen's identity and the mindset you should have when piloting this champion. The first point I have, and an analogy I really like to use, is that Garen is basically the top lane Kassadin, where they're both extremely weak early game, and Kassadin susceptible to being punished by AD mids, Garen by range tops, but once they start to scale, once they get level 6 they're quite strong, at level 11 they're quite powerful, and at level 16 they really start to take over the game. They're very similar in that regard, and a lot of people don't see Garen that way. They play Garen too aggressively 1 to 3, and because of that they get punished and they're unable to snowball the game later on. Where Kassadin players, most of the time, they're going to be playing safe until 6 because they don't really have their ulti, they don't have their gap closer before that, so it's easier for them to see their champion as a weak early game champ than you, but it's still the same. And the reason I like to say Garen is top lane Kassadin, not a champ like KO, is KO is more the top lane Cogmore, where he's just a standstill turret, he's just DPS, right? Really good scaling DPS that doesn't move very much, and Garen is similar to Kassadin because they like to get stuck in with the boys, but they're similar because they're weak early and they scale around the same time. And if you have the same mindset as you're playing Garen as you would when you're playing Kassadin, you're really going to start to have more success. The second point is Garen is basically a farm vacuum. He's one of the best top lane champs in the game at eating camps, and it's very easy to snowball just from farming. Now, especially early game, if you're in a losing matchup on the red side, it can feel quite good, because at level 7 onwards, Garen can actually start to eat Krugs very early on into the game, and it's very easy to get ahead of your opponent if you eat 2 or 3 Krug camps, but of course you don't want to annoy your jungler, make sure he doesn't want the Krugs first, but then if he's playing bot side, of course it's very easy for you to gain a lead purely from eating jungle camps. Now, in the mid-game section, we did talk about the pin and fog and playing between the lanes, using your side lane power to keep someone stuck under tier 2, and then playing between mid and bot to really impact the game. Now, Garen is one of the best champs in the game at doing so, because his move speed is just so high, especially once you have 5 points in Q, Dead Man's Plate, couple Zeals, whatever you want to build, it's going to have movement speed on it most likely. It's going to be very easy for you to go from bot to mid if you ever need to be a part of a fight. So if you ever verse a champion that also doesn't have TP when you're playing Garen, you have such a big advantage. It's a lot easier for you to go from site to a team fight than them, so if you can make it so you're in a situation where either you have them stuck, or even if they're in a winning matchup. Even if you've got the wave even, I've seen a lot of times, well, I've played a lot of games where I've been in a losing matchup on Garen, I lose the side lane, but I walk up to him, I Q him, stride breaker E, one shot the wave, prop phase rush on him, and he's trying to chase me down, but I'm out of there. I've got my phase rush, he's not going to catch me, and I'm able to use that movement speed. I've already cleared the wave, and I'm able to use Garen's innate movement speed from Q to get to a fight much earlier than him. And we did talk about it a lot in the teamfight section, but you should be looking to threaten the opponents from a flank. Garen hates running front to back. He can't just run through the whole enemy team most of the time. You're not playing Olaf. You really want to be looking to flank the opponent from the behind. And then even if they see you coming and they're respecting you, you're still going to be applying a lot of pressure in that way. And for my final point, I just have a general game plan. A guide like this, even though Garen is not the hardest champ in the game, I'm still giving you a ton of information. It can be hard to process it all at once, but if you have a general game plan in mind, it's going to help you feel a lot more clear in what you want to be doing in the game. And the general game plan on Garen is, of course, get 1100 gold base, look to play aggressive on that timer, and if you're in a position where you can win your matchup, look to proxy between the waves. Clear the waves, maybe proc demolish, run into the enemy jungle, eat their camps through in mid, through in jungle. We've talked about a lot throughout this guide because it's the most important part about playing Garen by far, and if you're able to do so, you're going to have a lot more success in your games. I'm next going to be going through a full early game review, and in this example I did get a kill level 1, but I lost all my sums, I lost a bunch of XP, and the kill only netted me a ruby crystal. So it's not the biggest advantage in the world, but I'm still able to snowball my lane to really take over this early game regardless of that kill. And the reason I wanted to showcase this instead of a full game is just because Garen's early game is the hardest part about him. He scales so extremely well, he's so good at team fighting later on, 2-3 items, and the mid game we went over that extensively, but the early game is going to be your hardest challenge. So here, Trundle of course beats me, I'm playing quite safe, I'm not letting him trade onto me, I'm just trying to pick up as much CS as I can without giving him a trading opportunity. Especially in this game I lost my potion, and here I'm able to pop Phase Rush, auto QE, so if he chased me down I could get away with it, but if you notice when I was level 1, I was not looking to do that. Because to proc Phase Rush level 1 you have to auto Q auto, which takes a long time, and during that time he's going to be beating my hidden. So here I'm just looking to get my CS, let the wave come back into me if I can, but if not, it's okay. I'm not too worried about getting pushed in this matchup because it is a Trundle, not the most threatening champion in the world. And then my main goal is of course to get 1100 gold before I base as normal. So I'll speed up the game a little bit because now it's getting a bit slow and I'm just looking to CS basically. I don't want to look to trade on him too aggressively. Of course here I can clear the mini wave and get a push, but I don't really want to fight him. I don't want to trade HP with him. All I want is my 1100 gold. And here he's doing what he should be doing, he's freezing the wave, and I'm actually looking mid. I'm thinking about ganking mid, but I choose against it. To be honest, in that situation, if I had Ghost and Flash, I would have gone for that. Azir was playing way too aggressive, and I had a timer where I would have lost some XP, because he had a freeze, of course, but I'm really going to change the scope of that mid matchup, because he's a low HP Azir, and if I'm able to kill him, of course it's going to be really good, but even if I'm not, I'm really freeing up space for Xerath. So here, of course, Trundle's looking to punish me, but I'm respecting. I'm not sitting too far forward. I'm sitting far enough back that if he goes at me, I can pop Phase Rush and escape. And now my Phase Rush is on cooldown, which is another concept about early game Garen. Play around your Phase Rush cooldown. Where here, of course, if I had Phase Rush, I could walk back towards him and I'd be fine, but I don't. And by the time my Phase Rush is back up, he's actually level 5, so I don't want to play too aggressive, and then I call for a gank, because the wave is coming back towards me, so I wanted Karthus to punish this Trundle when he went for a ward. But he didn't really understand, which is okay. You know, not all junglers are going to understand your intention, but here we're able to kill him anyway. Because the wave is coming back towards me, he's playing Trundle, there's no way he can CS without making himself in danger, so we're able to get a kill. And now, normally I could freeze this wave, but I'm level 5 Garen, which means when you're level 5, your E1 shots the casters, like we talked about, so it's very easy for me to push and base. And now that I've hit my 1100 gold spike, now I'm going to look to play very aggressive. Where even though I did have a kill before, I had a ruby crystal, I'm still an early game Garen. I can't really use that advantage at all, and that's okay. I'm going to use my advantage later on, and now especially since Karthus gave me that gank, it's going to be very easy for me to snowball. So now coming back onto the map, at this point with my Iron Spike whip, I'm going to really look to play aggressive. And the reason I ran Iron Spike instead of Berserker Greaves is because this game I took the inspiration page, one of my favorite setups on Garen, and the reason I did so is because even though versus Trundle, you might think Bone Plating is quite good, which of course it is, Demolish is not that good versus Trundle, you can't really break towers in front of them, and also if you notice they have 4 ranged champions. They have Nidalee, Azir, they have Kai'Sa, Milio, so I really want my Ghost up this game as much as possible, and Cosmic Insight is going to allow me to do just that. And with Cosmic you run free boots, which doesn't allow you to rush Berserker Greaves, but it's fine. Rushing Stridebreaker is very powerful as well, as long as you don't delay it. If you can get it before the enemy champion, before this Trundle gets his mythic, I'm going to really look to put down the hurt on him. So here I'm back in lane, and even though I'm ahead of him, I don't really just beat him outright 1v1, he's still a stronger champ than me early game, but I will look to outscale him. Here I dropped a couple CS for no reason, not sure why. But it's fine. I'm going to be looking to build waves and start to proxy whenever I can. And in my head, in this game, I was thinking level 7 would be my timer. When I get an extra point in E, I feel like I would be able to trade on him from that point. But before that, it's going to be hard. So I'm just looking to build a big wave and then try to proxy. So here, I'm probably going to look to trade on him if he walks up, but he's respecting, he knows he's not a bad player, and now that I've crashed a big wave, now this is when I really look to start to impact the game. I'm not going to poke this Trundle under tower, I don't want to let the wave come back towards me and try to kill him, he is a Trundle, he's pretty safe. I'm going to impact the game by proxying the wave between the tower, And if you saw there, he tried to stop me, but he can't. And then I'm going to look to roam. I'm going to look to take over the jungle, threaten Italy, eat camps, threaten mid, and that is how you carry the early game on Garen. If you can get to this position where you can get behind them, it's going to be really easy for you to take over. And in some games, you won't be able to just walk past your lane opponent. You might have to walk around the wall to get behind them. But if you manage to get behind them, even if they're stronger than you, it's going to be really hard for them to stop you. If they ever get onto you, just phase rush out of there. And here, as you notice, I gone this is there. I'm threatening mid. I noticed he's playing too aggressive, and I went on him. And look at this. I'm spam pinging calf assault, but Riot did remove that ping feature from the game, unfortunately, so he doesn't see it. So luckily, we have a 0F as well, and he's able to gun them down, and we're able to get a double kill purely based on my game plan, right? Where here, if I was playing purely to win my lane 1v1, kill this 0-1 Trundle again, which does literally nothing. He's not playing Fiora, he's not playing Riven. Shutting him down doesn't really do that much. Of course, he's not Ornn or Malphite. It's better to shut him down than to let him get fed. But what my main point is, it's not the most pressuring thing I can be doing. I can be using my pressure to impact the entire map instead of just my lane opponent, and sitting this Trundle behind is not going to be as impactful as sitting behind Nidalee or Azir. So from this point here, I'm going to look to get a base off and get my Stride Breaker, and unfortunately, normally on Garen, you're going to look to ward the Herald and at least play for it in some way, but unfortunately here, I used my timer to gank mid, to gank the jungle, so there was a time where I couldn't ward the Herald. So they were able to get it, but it's a worthwhile trade, right? I'm not saying you have to play for Herald every game. Of course, in this situation, I chose to give my prio around Herald to double kill them mid jungle, which is definitely worth. So anyway, here I come back, and I'm just looking to do the same thing all over again. I don't really want to play to kill this Trundle, it doesn't really interest me. I want to look to take over the map, eat the enemy jungle's camps, and make this Azir really unable to play the game. That is how you're going to win most of your games on Garen, if you're able to get into this position, and it's impossible to be able to do this every single game. You might get counterpicked by Darius, you might get camped, of course it's going to be hard. I'm just saying this should be your goal, because this is the most pressuring thing you can do on Garen early game, so it's what you really want to be trying to do. But anyway, here you can see I win trades now, so I'm looking to stack a big wave and get behind him again, and there's not much you can do. Also, you can take plates on your way out, even if you don't have Demolish, your Q will do a lot. And here, I'm going to repeat the process. Clear this wave, look to gank or eat camps, and in this case, Azir is not showing, so I'm probably just going to eat this camp, right? You can see how it's very calculated what I want to be doing with my lead. I'm very, I wouldn't say reactive, but I'm aware of what's happening on the map, and I'm playing accordingly. And here, look, I took the jungle camp right in front of Nidalee. I'm wasting her time. She's trying to pressure me, and this whole time, my entire team is punishing their bot lane, right? I've pulled the Nidalee top. If she didn't come, I'd eat all of her camps, which I kind of did anyway, but now she feels very pressured. She's trying to get me back for eating her camps. Pretty sure I wasted Ghost here, but it's fine. I'm wasting her time. My team is pressuring bot, and I'm not saying that's always going to be the case. If you waste enemy jungler's time, your team's going to do well. That's definitely not the case at all. I'm just saying it's going to increase your win chance significantly. And if he went bot, if he protected his team in this situation, I would have just continued to eat more and more of his camps. So now from this point, I'm breaking down tower plates, and normally you would have to match your lane opponent's base from this point, but on Garen, that's not the case. Especially once you have Stride Breaker, you don't really need to recall because, one, Garen doesn't have mana, and two, you just have so much sustain with your passive, you have to be pretty low HP to need to base. So most of the time on Garen mid-game, you're only basing when you need a very important item, a big spike. And here, Berserk agrees 1 dagger, it's not the biggest spike in the world, so I can stay and play for plates. And now that Trundle's back into the lane, I'm just thinking I want to repeat the process. Build a big wave, crash down to the tower, and play between the towers, proxy, eat camps, annoy the enemy jungle, and annoy the enemy mid. That's going to be consistently my game plan throughout the majority of my Garen games, because that is the highest chance of impacting the game, of winning the game. But now, Trundle's no slouch, I can't just completely ignore him, and here he ults me, so I have to cut it out, and I actually broke one of my rules here, where I didn't play around my phase rush cooldown. Because I was feeling overconfident, I was so strong, and because I didn't do so, he was able to beat my head in a bit. But it's actually okay, because Garen has a lot of sustain, not the worst thing in the world, it's just keep that in mind, playing around phase rush is going to be pretty consistent most of the time. And here I'm basing because I do have a big spike. I have Berserk Agrees and Zeal together, and now I'm going to be extremely powerful. Now, coming back onto the map from this point, the first thing I notice is that Trundle based after me, which means he has to react to me. I have the opportunity to pressure, and if he doesn't react to my waves, I'm going to break his structures. So me knowing that, I'm going to look to clear a wave under his tower, and look to attack the enemy jungle. I don't want to hit the tower a couple times, Trundle show up, and I waste my time. I'm going to run into the jungle and try to eat camps, and here I get the red buff on Nidalee. I'm going to look to threaten her, and I'm just impacting the game. I'm making Nidalee feel very unable to play, but in this situation their support was running to me. I'm pretty sure, yep, there he is, so I respected, and I'm just drawing people to me. I'm playing aggressive enough that I'm making people react to me, but not too aggressive that I'm going to die. And this is going to be your biggest skill when learning Garen, because There'll be a lot of situations you think you'll die and you won't actually die because you have phase rush, or the reverse, right? You might die when you think you're safe, but you just really need to learn the limit because phase rush Garen, not a lot of people know how to play into it, especially a good Garen, so it's very easy for you to play to the limit of your champion. And here, of course, they try to kill me again, but I'm just too fast. I've got Ghost, phase rush, Stride Breaker, Zeal, just all these movement speed items. It makes me mobile. It makes my champion have hyper mobility. It's very hard for them to lock me down. And in this situation, they tried to pressure me for a long time. I played to their limit to keep them interested, and then eventually my team came and backed me up, and we were able to wipe them. Up next, we're going to be covering the draft. Now, out of all the matchups I've covered so far, on Garen draft actually matters the least out of all of them. However, your matchup actually matters the most. If you can pick as late as possible in the game, try to get R5, B4, B5, and get a counter pick, this champion is going to feel much stronger than if you were to blind it. Not saying you're not going to be useful if you blind, but you're going to be much, much more powerful in the game if you can pick Garen in a good matchup. And there are still some things we can fine tune in regards to what you play with it on your team. So if you're playing Clash with the boys, you know what your comp wants to be looking like and what you don't want to be risking on the enemy team that I can go through, and we'll go through it now. So to start it off, you're going to want to be banning Vayne every game that you blind Garen, because Vayne top is his hardest matchup by far, and even if you don't verse a Vayne top, Vayne AD carry is still going to shred you, so it's a good ban regardless. And as for champions you want to be seeing on your team, for jungle you want to be having a lot of crowd control, because Garen has no CC of his own, so he pairs really well with champions like Sejuani and Maokai, who have a lot of crowd control and magic damage in their kit. These champions are perfect with Garen. And there's other champions that are good, champs like Rammus, champs like Zac. However, the reason they are not as good is because these champions are quite weak early game. So the enemy jungler, if he sees a Garen top with a Zac jungle, very easy for them to invade and punish them early. But if you have a Sejuani or a Maokai, then it's going to be fine. Those champions are strong enough early, and even if they get invaded and get behind, they are still going to be useful regardless. Now, as for mid and AD carry, the reason why I said draft doesn't matter too much is because of these roles where you can have two styles. You can either play range with Garen, where you have, say, an Azir or a Xerath mid, and the enemy team has to dive onto them, or they're going to get poked out, and then when they dive on, you can spin on through, or you can play with a dive comp. You could have a diving mid, such as Akali, or Sylas, and you can dive with them. And same with AD carry, you can dive with your Kai'Sa, or you can play outrange with a Jinx. It doesn't really matter, but as for support, you want to be having CC for two reasons. So let's say you have a Nautilus or a Rel, going to be very easy for you to teamfight and follow up their engage, but if you have an Enchanter, it can feel okay with Garen later on in the game, of course, if you have a Yuumi or a Soraka. However, their early game is going to be quite weak, so if you have a Garen top and let's say a Yuumi support, your team comp in general is going to be so weak early game, your jungler is not going to have any options. He's probably going to feel quite stressed, and the enemy jungler is going to have a ton of options. He's going to be able to invade, he's going to be able to punish top or bot. It's going to be very hard for your team to play, so ideally you want to be having a strong bot lane, so it's easy for your jungler to play through them. Moving on to the champs you don't want to be seeing on your team. For jungle, these are going to be champs that have no CC and they're physical damage. So champs like Graves, champs like Kindred, even champs like Lee Sin will not feel very good with Garen. Lee Sin, of course, being the best out of the three, but Graves and Kindred are going to feel awful. And as for mid, you don't want to have the same thing. Champs like Akshan are going to feel terrible, even Jace mid not so good. Just AD champs in general from mid and jungle don't feel great with Garen. Some of them can as long as they have crowd control. Champs like Poppy jungle would be a lot better, but just in general, no CC champs are going to feel horrible with Garen. And as for AD carry, you really don't want to be playing with low damage AD. So let's say, for example, you're winning side lane, and you're trying to create a numbers advantage for Baron later on into the game. If you have a Jhin, a champion I hate playing with on a side laning champion, you don't really have any Baron threat. If they gank you with 3 people, your team's not actually going to be able to burst down Baron unless they have a Cassiopeia or something. So if you have a Jhin and a normal damage mid, a champ like Xerath, you're probably not going to be able to clear Baron in regards to your pressure, so it's going to be very hard for you to close out the game if you're the only strong member on your team. And as for support, we just talked about it, very weak champions early game like Yuumi, you don't want to be playing with Garen because the entire map is just going to be too weak. Moving on to the enemy team. Champs you don't want to be seeing when you're playing Garen, champs that make you unlikely to pick him. For top lane will be champions that are very hard in lane. So champions like Vayne, Kayle, or Heimer, very difficult range matchups can make it unlikely that you want to be playing Garen. As for jungle, there's going to be two categories, champs that can easily kite you, or champs that can punch you early game. So in my opinion, Lilia is actually the hardest, as it's very easy for her to run you around, she has a lot of percentage HP damage, and you're not really going to be able to look to punish her early game, as you want to be playing for your 1100 gold base. And then other than Lilia, champions like Rek'Sai and Elise, very strong early game, can make it easy for them to punish you and stop you from getting a good recall. Now, as for mid, you don't want to be versing a ton of sustained damage. The champions like Cassiopeia can be very difficult, Azir later on, but Cassio is actually one of the hardest. And as for AD carry, it'll be the same thing, champs like Kog'Maw, even a Vayne AD carry, a ton of sustained damage. It's going to be hard for you to kill them before they shred you, as you have to run towards them. And then as for support, you don't really want to be versing enchanters. Champions like Lulu can make it very difficult. Champs like Soraka, they can heal or shield whoever you go on, and it's going to be very hard for you to burst them down with your single target abilities. And as for the champions you do want to be versing, for top lane, it's going to be champions where it's easy for you to proxy and impact the map that way. So my favorite matchup is actually Malphite, as he's trying to poke you down with Q, but you're just going to sustain it back with Dawn Shield and your passive, and eventually you're going to be able to play between his towers, proxy, break, demolish on his tower plates, and impact the map in that way. And then even later on into the game, it's going to be very easy for you to play mid-game, because he wants to roam, he wants to use his ulti, and when he does, you're going to break more and more towers, especially when you get Hullbreaker. It's very easy for you to play into champions like Malphite or Ornn. And as for jungle, you want to be versing champions where it's very hard for them to lock you down, and they have skill shots. Champions like Lee Sin and Nidalee are just perfect, because if they go on you, it's very easy to just proc phase rush and boost on out there, dodge their skill shots, and even if Lee hits Q, it doesn't matter, you're still going to get on out. They don't do enough damage to kill you. And as for mid, it's going to be two categories. Either melee mids like Silas or Fizz, they have to go in, or range champions that rely on skill shots. So champions like Xerath, if you're running towards him with Ghost and Stridebreaker, he is not going to be able to hit you with anything. It's going to be very easy for you to take him out. And then the melee champs, they have to go in, so it's easy for you to silence them, stop them from Zonyazing or Fizzying, and then spin on through them. Now, as for AD carry, it's best to verse champions that do low amounts of damage to you. So Jhin is the absolute favorite. Of course, he's skill shot reliant as well. He's just perfect to verse. Even a poking Varus would be good to verse as well, or that old Ashe build. Champs like that do not very much damage, but they have a bit of utility. It's very easy for Garen to play into them. And as for support, you mainly want to be versing melee supports, as they don't really give you a lot of trouble. Your W blocks a lot of their CC, and if you tank a full Nautilus combo, you're helping your team in a different way. Whereas if they had an enchanter, it's very easy for them to keep someone alive that you're trying to go on. Up next, I'm going to be covering how to counter Garen, how to exactly play against this champion. And the first tip I have is try to make him base before 1100 gold. Because if Garen comes back to lane with Berserker Greaves, he's going to be pretty strong, but if you can make him base before that, make him buy a longsword or a ruby crystal, he's not going to be a problem. And the two main ways you do that is if you're playing a ranged champion, of course you want to look to poke him down and force him to base as fast as you can. If you're playing Kennen or GP, just look to harass him. Or if you're playing a melee champion such as Olaf, Darius, even Renekton, Jax, Riven, doesn't matter, any melee bruiser, you're going to look to crash wave 3 under his tower, let it bounce back towards you, and then call for a gank. It's really easy to punish Garen early game when he just has Dawn Shield, especially if you're a strong bruiser, but if your jungler doesn't want to help, that's okay. Most of the time you're going to be able to beat him anyway, especially if you're another ghost champion, such as Olaf or Darius, you can really look to solo kill him. But if you're not, if you're just playing champ like Renekton or Jax, if you ran Ignite in that game, it's going to be very easy to punish him. Now let's say for example, you're playing Renekton with Ignite, wave comes back towards you, and you don't think you can kill him. Even if you all on him with Ignite and chunk him to a quarter HP, and he has to base, that is fine. Your main goal with this wave control is not to kill this guy. Your main goal is to make him base and buy a crappy item. Because if he has a Berserker Greaves and comes back to lane, there's going to be a good chance he can trade onto you. But if he comes back with a Ruby Crystal and you have one as well, most likely your champion is going to be stronger than him depending on matchup, but he is not going to be maximizing his power if he buys a subpar item. And a lot of that ties into the next point, have a clear game plan in mind to punish him. Now that is the first sequence, before your first base, how to punish him, make him back before 1100, but in general, most of the champions you play versus Garen will be stronger than him. Even if he does get the 1100 gold base he wants, a lot of champions can still beat him. You will just want to have a clear game plan in mind, how am I going to punish this champion? Because Garen scales extremely well, so you really want to look to get an advantage over him early game. And he's very easy to get ganked in by a lot of champions, Let's say you're playing Camille. Of course, you might not be able to outright kill him 1v1, but it's very easy to set up ganks if you're playing for it. A lot of people make the mistake I see, they just push wave after wave under tower, and they just let Garen farm for free. When this champion doesn't mind being harassed under tower most of the time, unless it's a very strong champion, like Kennen or like Vayne, he doesn't really mind copying a bit of harass because he can sustain it back with Dawn Shield and his passive, so you want to have a clear game plan in mind with the wave. Make it come back towards you, punish him, or in some situations, crash, keep him under tower and play for tower plates with Demolish, because his damage is not that high early game, doesn't really matter if he goes on you, and then look to carry the game in a different way. Just the worst thing you want to be doing, the worst thing you can do is give him wave after wave, just push him for no reason, have a clear game plan in mind, how am I going to punish this guy's weak early game, and act on it. Now this third point is probably the most important out of all of them, where you want to be keeping him stuck in the lane. Because Garen won't take TP, TP is terrible on Garen, and most champions you play will probably have TP. Now the way to counter him, way to abuse your TP over him, is to, let's say, for example, you've been playing out the lane for 5 minutes, he's looking to base, you crash a big wave under his tower, you base and you TP straight away. I see a lot of people make the mistake, they base and they think, oh, I don't need a TP, I'm not going to lose any farm. They walk back to lane, but the time it takes you to walk back to lane gives Garen a base, which means he's very happy. But if you TP back and now you've got, you've spent your 1100 gold, you've got an item over him, and now you're just pushing waves, keeping him stuck under the tower, he's not going to be able to base and spend his gold. And now that he's stuck under the tower with a Doran shield, even you can either do two things. You can let the wave come back into you, hold a big freeze, and then when he bases, you're going to lose a lot of XP. Or you can look to start proxying, break tower plates depending on your champion, run at the enemy jungle. It's going to be very easy for you because they can no longer really gank you. They're not going to kill you with a Doran shield Garen in an early game jungler. It's just not going to happen unless you're playing super disrespectfully. So keep that in mind. If you have TP and you're versus Garen, it's very overpowered to keep him stuck in the lane. And for the final points, play for a Herald. A lot of champions you play versus Garen are just going to be outright stronger than him at 8 minutes, even if you're in a bad matchup. Even if you're playing Ornn or Malphite, your threat on the Herald teamfight is going to be a lot higher than Garen. He doesn't really come online until Stridebreaker, and he's definitely not going to have it before a Herald fight, so try to play for it. Ward it before 8 minutes, ping your jungler to play for it, and try to secure it, because Garen is so weak early game, you really want to be looking to get an advantage, but if you're playing a champion that's also weak in lane, a champion like Malphite or Ornn or Sion, try to play for the Herald instead. And the other point being, mark Garen in teamfights. Now, not every champion you play in top lane can do so, but Garen should be looking to flank. But if you can mark him and stop him from approaching your team, let's say you're playing champion like Gnar. Gnar is so good into Garen mid-game, because if he tries to flank your team, you can just chase him down. Now, of course, you're not always going to be playing Gnar, but a lot of champions can do so. Champions like Darius, Olaf, Camille, basically every top lane champion except for a tank can mark Garen very easily, which means you can stop him from flanking, which means his impact in the teamfight is going to be very low. And to wrap it up, we're going to be going through the main takeaways. I really want you guys to keep these things burned into your brain, because although there was a ton of information from this guide, these are the most important things. First one being, play for your 1100 gold base. If you can get Berserker Greaves or Iron Spike on your first recall, your success rate on the champion is going to be a lot higher than if you play aggressive level 1, 2, and 3, and you have to buy a Ruby Crystal. Second point being, proxy between the lanes and play to attack the enemy jungle mid. Don't really tunnel on playing for a 1v1 kill on your lane. Of course, sometimes it's good, but most of the time, the most pressuring thing you can possibly do is play to attack the entire team, the entire top side of the map. Third point being, mid-game look to create a numbers advantage. Your champion doesn't have any engage really, but you're pretty strong in side lane, and in side lane you're very hard to kill, so you can use that pressure to make people react to you or keep someone stuck. If you can keep their top laner stuck under tower, then you can play between the lanes and threaten a 5v4, or if you can make someone gank you, your team can play 4v3. Your main goal from using your side lane power is to create numbers advantage. And the final point being, practice playing to your limits, because Garen is so hard to kill like we just talked about in the side lane, but you really want to be knowing your limits on him. You don't want to play too aggressive and be a free kill, or too passive and not draw anyone to you, because you're not creating numbers advantage that way from playing too passive. And if you get killed, you're not creating numbers advantage as well after, because the whole minute you're dead, coming back onto the map, they have a huge timer to make a 5v4 of their own. So practice playing on that lane. That is what's going to separate the good Garens from the bad ones, because if you can min-max the amount of pressure you're having in the side lane, your win rate is going to be extremely high. Now, to wrap it up, we're going to be going through the main takeaways, the most important things I want you guys to burn into your brain. The first point being, play for the 1100 gold base, because realistically, most people are not going to be dying to Garen early game. If you die to a Garen 1-3 when they have Doran shield, you must have done something extremely bad. Where if he gets 1100 gold, comes back on lane with Berserker Greaves, now he has a lot of options to actually play the game properly. Second point being, now that you have those options, play to proxy between the towers. Now you won't be able to do so every game, but that should be your game plan, because it's the most pressuring way to play League right now, and if you can do so, you're going to have a much higher success rate in your games. Proxy between the towers, threaten the enemy jungle, threaten enemy mid, eat the enemy jungle's camps, and you're going to be impacting the whole game instead of just your lane. Now, the third point being, mid-game, play to create a numbers advantage for your team. Whether that be a 5v4 by making your lane opponent stuck under tower and then grouping with your team, or a 4v3 by making someone gank you, you want to be playing for that numbers advantage, because your champion is so difficult to kill in side lane and you're so good at pushing, you should be using that to create an advantage for your team. And even though your champion has no real form of engage, you can create a numbers advantage and help your team in that way. And the final point being, practice playing to the line. Now this is the most important part about playing Garen mid-game in my opinion, because I see a lot of people mess this up. Where you should be playing aggressive enough to pull people to you, but not too aggressive to the point where you die for free. Because if you're dead, you cannot create a numbers advantage for your team. It's very easy for them to group during your death timer, during the time they wait for you to run bot, push a couple waves. They have a lot of freedom to punish your teammates. So if you ever get caught out in side lane, now they have another minute and a half to just kill your teammates. And if you play solo queue quite often, it's very easy for people to get caught out, especially if they have 5 people and your teammates have 4. So if you want to be minimizing the amount of times that happens, you want to be playing to create a numbers advantage, but you really need to get good at that line. You want to be playing so aggressive that they have to answer you, they have to send multiple people to deal with you, but not too aggressive that you're not able to escape it with your phase rush, with your ghost. Whatever you need to use to escape it, it's fine as long as you do so. Okay guys, I'm going to wrap up there, and I recommend you guys give Garen a go. I don't think I've laughed as much playing solo queue as I did while playing Garen. The champion is just so much fun, and the skill set you learn on this champion, especially the mid-game macro, is going to help you on a lot of champions. Because Garen's kit is so simple, that means anything you practice in regards to wave control, mid-game macro, things like this, it's going to be a lot easier to think about on Garen, because you don't really need to think about his abilities too much. So I recommend you give him a try for that reason, and whatever champion you want to see next, let me know down below as usual. But other than that, I'll see you guys next time.